really should be is an organic extension of your church. Too often, I think we fall into the habit of choosing a theme because it's entertaining or it's fun or it's cute or we like the music without really thinking about who we are in our faith community. What are your ministries? What is your congregation like? What is your community like? And I think that's really important. It ought to be an extension of that. Secondly, we need to think about VBS as being an opportunity for children to do authentic ministry. This isn't just let's entertain the kids, every morning for a week. We really want to recognize that children have the potential for incredible spiritual growth and really can engage on a very profound spiritual level. And so we want to give our children the opportunity to do authentic ministry and to be a part of the authentic ministries from our church. The other thing we want to think about is we want to make sure that it's theologically sound. And what I mean by that is that we all come from a number of different traditions with different theologies. And oftentimes, if we're choosing a vacation Bible package, vacation Bible school package, without really looking at the theology, it may not be reflective of who we are and what we believe. And we can't assume the kids are going to get theology by osmosis. We need to be explicit in our theology. One of the things that I've seen, I come from the Episcopal tradition, and oftentimes I've heard kids who volunteer at my vacation Bible school spout ideas and understandings of God that are really inconsistent with what we believe. And I know they didn't learn that at our church, but they get these messages from the media and from other sources. So Vacation Bible School is an opportunity to be really clear in what our theology is. So, slide 3, how to get started. So before you start looking at Vacation Bible School themes, let's take a step back. Tell me about your church. What are you known for? What are the ministries that you're known for? What's really working at your church? What are the resources that you have as far as personnel or music or materials or physical space? We are adjacent to a park, so we've got this tremendous natural space that we can use. Maybe you have, a jazz praise band. Could you incorporate that into the Vacation Bible School that you're putting together? Again, think about your ministries and what can naturally grow out of them. Next question I would ask you is to tell me about your community. What are the demographics in your community? What are the challenges and concerns that are facing your community? And that might include things like, what do people do with their kids in the summer? Are you in a community where people are engaging in a lot of like high-priced camps, sending their kids to all-day activities, all-day programming? Are you in a community that maybe there's some more economic fragility and people are looking for quality and safe summer programming for their children? What about the teenagers in your community? Do they work? Do they not work? Are they in programs of their own? Do they go to sleepaway camp? Are they available? What about families? Are you in a community where most parents work and therefore their kids are in daycare, that maybe the old model of a weekday morning doesn't work? Maybe you need to think about a twilight or an evening and a multi-generational Vacation Bible School. And again, so thinking about the needs in your community, what are some of the problems or concerns that your Vacation Bible School could address? Is there a need for reading support? Do children have food insecurity? What could you do to reach out to your community? And this really leads into the next question. What do you want to achieve with your VBS? What are your goals? I think for a lot of us, VBS is just what we do because we've done it for 20 years. Or maybe you've just been hired in this ministry and it fell in your lap. It seems like it might be such an obvious question, but in fact, by making an intentional statement and recognizing what these goals are, it can really help you shape your program. So if you get a lot of kids from outside your neighborhood, maybe you're looking for VBS as a way to grow your parish community. Maybe you're looking for a way, as we talked about, to meet some of the needs in your community. Maybe you're looking for an opportunity, maybe you don't get a lot of outside kids, but you really want to use this as a rich, immersive experience to really work on the faith foundation, deepen the faith foundation of the kids who are currently part of your population. So again, once you start thinking about that, it's really going to help you decide what it is that you want to do and what theme you want to go with. So, thinking about themes. See, you're good on the slides there. All right, lots of different kinds of themes. And I don't want people to get confused or tied up. This is just to give you some general understanding of different ways we might define theme. One type of theme we might want to think about is a linear temporal theme. We're going to start at the beginning of the story, and we're going to move through the theme. We're going to move through the story. We might want to think about character-driven themes. One year we did a Christmas in July vacation Bible school, and we looked at the nativity from the perspective of different characters within the story, from Mary, from Joseph, from Jesus, from the angels and the shepherds, from the wise men. We might think about component themes. So a component theme might be something where there's a predetermined number of segments. The 7 days of creation, the 4 Gospels, the 10 Commandments, where each of your VBS daily themes is based on one of those components. We might look at literary or media-based themes. So this would be like the Gospel according to Harry Potter, where we're taking contemporary literature or other forms of media, TV or movies, and using those as a way to explore our faith and as kind of a lens to amplify our faith using those themes. We might have an immersive theme. And when I say an immersive theme, this is one that engages children in a world of pretend, imagining they are a jungle explorer, a scientist, an Olympic athlete, and then they'll draw gospel lessons as that character from within that kind of pretend world. You might have a geographical, a historical, or kind of an idea-based theme. I know that one that a number of people I've talked to this year doing are kind of a peace camp and understanding different cultures. So like promoting culture, multicultural understanding. Historical might be learning from the time, setting it in the time of Jesus, or following the journeys of Paul. So that might be more of a geographical one. Or you might have an activity-based theme. And these are going to be hands-on opportunities such as cooking, art, movie making, gardening, through which we can experience and engage in the gospel. Now, again, when you're putting together your program, you really can have a mishmash of kind of all of these. Overall, when you think about a good theme, I like a theme that isn't too rigidly defined. There needs to be room within the theme for the child to experience some aspect of transformation and for them to bring something to the theme, for them to live into it in a very unique and personalized way. So it's not too dictatorial or rigid. Also, a good theme, there's an element of transformation. Where we end up is not where we started. So you want something that's going to change and evolve over the span of your vacation Bible school. So just to give you, and let me throw some caveats at you too. When we think about like a linear or a temporal theme, so maybe we're gonna tell a story. Oftentimes in Scripture, it's the Old Testament stories that, I mean, there's a reason they make movies out of those. All right, there's a lot of action and excitement. One of the things we need to think about if we choose a theme that is based entirely on the Old Testament is that if we attract children to our vacation Bible school who are not coming from a faith community, this is our opportunity to introduce them to the concept of Jesus and who Jesus was. So if our theme is entirely on the Old Testament, I mean, you know, if you've got like a Moses-based theme, you could do such fun things with that. But if we never bring the good news of Jesus into it, we're kind of missing an opportunity. So one of the running jokes when we do VBS is it's got to be Jesus by Wednesday. So even if we start in the Old Testament, by the time we get to Wednesday on a 5-day program, you know, we've introduced Jesus and we've brought the good news into the programming. The other thing to think about, I'm always a little nervous with immersive themes. As my sarcastic college-age son refers to them as Jesus in space. Let's pretend we're astronauts. Here's my issue with that, and I love pretend, and I love storytelling and immersive theater. But if the entire theme is let's pretend we're astronauts or jungle explorers or whatever, are we also pretending about God. And when our kids get a little bit older and see themselves as too old for pretend, does God get thrown out the window too? So I think which is why I actually love some literary and media-based themes, because then you're bringing in that world of role-playing and pretend, but you're not equating it with God. You're using it as a lens to explore our understanding of faith and Scripture and God. So again, just some caveats. The one thing to think about and consider, though, with literary or media-based themes, we need to be really careful using copyright materials. I could not name a VBS, The Gospel According to Harry Potter, because that is copyright material, or Frozen VBS. However, you can do a VBS theme and say, as part of the, Wands and Wizards, we're going to use the literature of, the story of Harry Potter to explore. So it becomes a way that you explain what you're going to do, but you can't title and you can't use copyright images. Now, what you can do is, so let's say you're doing a Frozen VBS, you can go to your local party store and you can buy your cardboard cutouts of Elsa, and you can make, snow cones, and you can use it. You can use it as inspiration. You just have to be very careful in terms of copyright. So, to give you some theme ideas of some of the themes I've done over the years. One year we did Wade in the Water, because honestly, we love Water Day and we love playing with water. And there's a lot of really interesting things we could do with water. So we started in the Old Testament with water and its destructive power. We started with the story of Noah. We moved into the story of Moses, and we were able to see Moses' rebirth going into the water and coming out of the Nile. He went in as a Jewish slave and came out as, was pulled out by Pharaoh's daughter as a prince. And so we were able to do some foreshadowing and say, okay, let's think about the baptism of Jesus, and Jesus by Wednesday. So on Wednesday, we did the baptism of Jesus, and we talked about the foreshadowing we saw with Moses. And then we talked about the ways we respond to water. Jonah and the potential destruction of water, thinking back to Noah, this idea of Jonah being spit out by the whale, rebirth, and new life. The woman at the well, she understood the importance of water and sustaining life, but when she met Jesus, she had a new understanding of water. So this transformational understanding. And then we moved into, first, Jesus calms the storm, so calming and mitigating the destructive aspects of water, and then transformation of water into wine, Jesus being the good news. So that was kind of our arc of movement over the week. As I said, another program that we did was Christmas in July. One of the things that we experience is a lot of our kids travel on Christmas, so never have the opportunity to be part of the Christmas pageant. And so maybe they have just a very secular understanding of Christmas. So we organized it as a character-driven theme. The first day was Mary and her willingness to accept the miracle and opportunity that God granted her. Then Joseph as a protector and nurturer. Jesus, the best Christmas gift ever. We focused on that. Then we focused on the shepherds and angels. The shepherds being these lowly, hardworking people who were the first to know that a miracle had occurred. It wasn't the people that were usually first in line for gifts. And then finally, the wise men, and how our whole lives can be a journey of discovery, going out to find Jesus. And it was also a great sending, because we could say to the kids, you, like the wise men, are going out into the world, go find Jesus. So that kind of worked. Another VBS that we did was Draw the Circle Wide. One of the things that we find in our community is there's a lot of interest that families have in having their children do outreach activities. So I've had people come in and say, I'm going to take my 4-year-old to serve at a soup kitchen. And this being a family who had no experience with that. And so I had to talk to them about kind of age appropriateness and how the people at the homeless shelter that they were considering might not respond to their child in the way that they were hoping. It wouldn't be like, thank you, dear sweet little child, for serving me. That people might exhibit behaviors that might be scary or confusing to a child. So sometimes people want to teach their children outreach, but don't know where to start and don't know things that are age appropriate. So VBS, conceptually, I thought of like ripples in a pond or the rings on the circles of a tree. And so first of all, we started with here in our inner ring, we're called to be helpers in God's creation. So, we baked doggy biscuits for our own pets and shared those with an animal shelter. And then we moved out a ring to helping our families. We made kindness jars. Third day, helping my friends. So we made tote bags for refugee children who are attending an English immersion camp in our community. Then we moved out to helping in our broader community, and we made some note cards and stuff like that to support our priests and other people who are engaged in pastoral care ministries. And then finally, we talked about and this is an important point, helping people who might even be frightening to us or people we don't know, and how to, again, as a child, keep ourselves safe, but also help people. And so we made homeless bags with things that might be helpful to someone who is homeless. And we talked about ways to share that with people, but yet still keep a child safe. And we gave families the option, they could take these bags with them and distribute them themselves, or we said that if they weren't comfortable with that, they weren't kind of at that point yet, that we could include that in our ongoing homeless ministry. So again, just some ideas of the directions that themes can take, and movement and transformation, because I think that's really important. Slide 5. All right, I guess we're going good on time. All right, so once you kind of have your theme, this is where it gets really fun. And this is where my partner in VBS in crime, Kristen Morgan, texts me in the middle of the night going, I've got the best idea. When you sit down to do your stations and to figure out what your activities are going to be, don't be too rigid with your stuff. Start with your theme and then start throwing stuff out there. Don't constrain yourself with, okay, we need 5 crafts and 5 snacks. You'll get to that point. But when you start out, have fun with it. Start exploring your theme and say, all right, what scripture might support that? What is the music? What is the great, what are the hymns that might support that? Now, and here we always get into a great debate versus church music and not church music. And honestly, you have to go with what you're comfortable with. Some people would say, well, this is an opportunity to introduce children to the great hymnody, and this is part of our tradition, and this is, they can listen to secular music anywhere. Okay, that's valid. But it's also a way to say, hey, look, people are writing psalms even today, and here's this secular music that picks up on these themes that we're talking about. Bottom line is, it has to work for you. There are so many great, I always refer to them as like camp and playground songs and very singable songs. You do not have to be a musician to have fun with music at VBS. And it is such a huge part of it, because after they've forgotten everything else, they're still going to be singing those songs. Arts and crafts, which is certainly like the mainstay of, when we think about Vacation Bible School, that's another one that we really think about. Certainly in my book, I get into a lot more conversation about some of the details of doing this successfully. But some of the things to think about is when we're doing arts and crafts, we really want to we want to think about stewardship and kind of being very ecologically minded. I don't like to make throwaway crafts. I don't like to make trash. And while exploration of the materials is a really important part of scriptural exegesis and creativity, we want to think about what we're doing and how we're doing it. So the old glue the googly eyes on foamy shapes, those little pre-order kits, I'd steer you away from those. Prayer and worship. For many of our children, Vacation Bible School is one of the only opportunities that they will have to be in a sacred space, to pray in community and collaboratively. And so we do not want to waste those opportunities. And we want to make sure that our clergy are part of this, so that our clergy can be models for our kids and engage with our kids and not be that kind of distant person that's up on the altar. Performing arts. There's so many great experiential immersive opportunities that we can do at VBS as far as acting out the story. And some things to think about. There's always the classic skit where you round up the church staff and volunteers or some teenagers and they do the skit. But don't forget to give your kids the opportunities to act out those scriptural stories too. That's how children learn, by pretending and living into those stories. And here's a key point with that. They don't have to have an audience. When children do creative and imaginative play, often they're not doing it for an audience. So don't hesitate to do your skit maybe that demonstrates or tells this scriptural story, but then give your little kids the opportunity on their own to act it out in kind of a prompted or facilitated way. Certainly games, everybody needs to run and blow some steam off. That being said, I think it's really important with games. This is not gym class. I was a kid that was traumatized by dodgeball, collective games like camp games. I hate it. So giving children some optionality that they don't have to participate. And it's important that games be very structured. That you certainly can have free outdoor play, but with games, if you're not careful, everything kind of turns into rugby. So really working on balancing maybe 1v1 games, relay races, circle games, things that don't have children just running in a scrum, because when that happens, you end up with the biggest, strongest, and most aggressive kids kind of steamrolling everybody else and traumatizing children like me. Snacks and cooking. Breaking bread is a very essential act of the Christian faith. And so gathering together for meals is really, really important and foundational. And we can be very intentional about making that an important part of our VBS. For so many kids, they do eat on the run, and a lot of families aren't able to really sit down and enjoy a meal. This is a tremendous opportunity that you don't want to just kind of blow by throwing, quick food at them. Inviting children to take part in preparing snacks can also be an incredible activity. One year, our theme was St. Francis in the Garden. At our church, we had started a community produce garden that was going to provide produce to our local food bank. And so the kids helped with planting the garden and tending the garden and learning about that, and all under the lens of St. Francis's life. And so for our snacks, we made snacks that week out of produce from the garden. And so that was a really neat way for the kids to engage in an authentic ministry in our church. Non-craft projects and activities can be great for your VBS. These might be outreach activities. These might be things like building activities using Legos or other building materials to build little dioramas. A different kind of creative exegesis to engage in scripture and the stories. And finally, you have an opportunity to do some digital projects and be part of the maker movement. That's a movement in educational circles right now. Number one, to recognize that authentic learning occurs outside of the school. I certainly would agree with that. And also a lot of times there's a digital component. So instead of just doing a shoebox diorama, you might make a shoebox diorama and have it automated in some way. And there's all kinds of kits that you can get to help facilitate this. Or you also can do things like take a digital photo safari where, you have some different prompts, scriptural prompts, and you have the kids walking around in groups with phones taking pictures of where they see that. So there's all different ways that you can engage kids in your theme. Now, once you start, get your ideas out there, start suggesting. Once you get your ideas out there, then it's time to start plugging in and, figure out what's going to go where. Do you have to do every kind of station every day? Of course not. Does every group have to do every station? Of course not. For younger children, it's not going to be age appropriate. And when you try to have older kids do the same things as younger kids, then older kids are real quick to say, well, that's for babies. So you really have a lot of flexibility. And another technique that I like to use is I have what I call overflow stations. We always have a library nook, a building station, a creative play station, so that, when that arts and crafts project goes really quickly and all of a sudden you've got a group of kids with like 20 minutes to burn, you've got stations where their different group leaders can take them to fill that time. And so that's one way that you can work in some of these other stations. All right, so after you've dealt with the creative and the fun aspect, you got to start nailing it down. And while the creative aspect is what is fun, the success of your VBS absolutely hinges on your logistics. There is nothing more important, because if it is not organized, it's just going to be a hot mess. So putting a lot of time into this, this is where it needs to be. So first about thinking about logistics. And these are things like, how many children can you realistically accommodate? And if you're breaking them down into groups, how many spaces do you have in your facility? Are they outdoor spaces and indoor spaces? How many breakout areas can you have? How do kids move from point A to point B? What other groups are in your space while this is happening? You need to ask questions like, how young is too young? How young are you going to accept? We're really adamant that kids have to be potty trained, because again, that's if you have children who need assistance with toileting or need to have diapers changed, that changes the requirements for your volunteers and your staffing. You also might want to think about the upper end of the ages of the kids that you will serve. We're pretty flexible and pretty fluid, and I will tell you that as kids get to be a little older and they decide they're too old for VBS, I've had fourth graders come to me and say, well, I'm not doing that because that's for babies. So I immediately say, do you want to be a helper? They're like, yeah. So there is a loosey-goosey top end. I've had fifth graders that are campers and fourth graders that are helpers, and you know, there's a lot of flexibility there, and working with your population to make sure kids understand that there's a place for them and allowing them to engage in a way that makes sense for them. It can't be a free-for-all, I get that, but if I can accommodate a slightly young helper and partner them with an older adult or a teenager so that they feel like they're helping and actually give them authentic work to do, then they're going to remain engaged with my program much longer than if they feel like they're being treated like a baby. Thinking about volunteers and staffing. And again, this is knowing your community. What are the teenagers up to? What are they up to in your community? Do they work? Do they need community service? How do you connect with them? Thinking about the availability of adults. Do you have a population of stay-at-home parents that could be involved? Do you have grandparents? Do families in your community hire nannies or babysitters or au pairs during the day that maybe they might be interested in helping to staff? Do you have scout troops in your area? What are the populations that you can draw on? And even looking at some of the other ministries in your church, what are your music ministries? Are there people that are part of the music ministry that maybe don't want to chase kids around but might come and lead songs? Doesn't have to be the choir director. It can be someone that just has a passion for music. And really trying to figure out what are ways that volunteers who cannot be there physically, can they support you somehow? Can you send them, on Walmart runs at 6 in the morning to buy snacks? Can they do some baking or cooking off-site? Can they help preparation of craft materials in the evening when they get home from work? So really thinking about finding a way to help people, make it easy for people to be a part of it. Obviously, logistically, you got to start thinking about your stations and activities. So that means this is when you start putting together your grids and you start blocking your different groups and figuring out where they're going to be and when they're going to be there. And one of the things that I do is I usually have a couple different time schedules. If we have a special event or a special visitor that's going to take up a lot of time, I have then a schedule that says, okay, well, our remaining stations are going to be shorter. So you just have to start kind of playing with it. And sometimes our opening skit goes long, and I'll say, okay, we're going to go on schedule A today as opposed to schedule B. We're going to go with 15-minute stations instead of 20-minute stations. The more you block that out, the better. And it also helps just that you know where everybody is, where they're supposed to be at any given time. You got to think about the length and timing of your program. For many churches, a 5-day, half-day, or full-day VBS is just more than they can handle. And that's fine. You're better to do a 3-day VBS. Maybe you do Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Give yourself a little breathing room in between. Maybe you do kind of a long weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday with worship on Sunday. As I said earlier, maybe you do evenings. Maybe you do every Sunday in July after church. Whatever works for you, whatever meets the needs of your participants, your family, your community, wherever you can get volunteers and staffing. And volunteers and staffing and participants, it's always kind of a chicken and egg question. Do I say that I'm going to have 60 kids and therefore I need this number of volunteers, or do I say I can get this number of volunteers, therefore I can accommodate this number of kids? The one thing you cannot do is leave yourself short there. It is a safety issue that you just cannot compromise. The other thing I would strongly recommend, if you are the coordinator of VBS, leave yourself unassigned. And that's really hard to do because I really want to assign myself to the library to read the book, and I really want to assign myself to the art room to lead the craft. You need to be accessible and available no matter what goes down. So if there's a concern here or a question there or a problem here, your role at VBS may be just circulating around through all the stations and making sure everything is going as it needs to be going. So don't overschedule yourself. I cannot stress that enough. So let's talk about a little bit more about volunteers and staffing, and let's talk about teenagers. Teenagers are your secret weapon. They are the best ever. Do whatever you need to get teenagers, okay? They will eat twice their weight in snacks, so you have to have extra snacks. They may make out in your classrooms. I've caught them doing so. We had conversations. They may hit the rector with a water balloon, whatever. They are still worth it. They are rock stars. Nobody thinks teenagers are cooler than little kids. Little kids love big kids. Big kids love being rock stars. And the other thing is they have a creative energy that most adults just do not. You know, when it's February and March and I'm planning VBS and I've started talking to my teenagers and they're running up to me at coffee hour on Sunday going, Mrs. Brown, I got the best idea. Adults aren't doing that. So engage your teenagers and capture and ride that energy. Some examples of that, when I typically decorate my set. So the one year we were designing, you know, the nativity scene. And I said to them, all right, I've got to go back to my desk. Here's kind of what I want it to look like. Go at it. I had a couple girls who spent 8 hours making palm trees. They were the most gorgeous palm trees ever. I would not spend 8 hours making palm trees, but they were so proud of those palm trees. One year we did Seuss on the Loose based on Dr. Seuss. And I had a group of girls make these crazy pink birds that they hung from the rafters. I was not making crazy pink birds. So if you open the door for them to really influence your VBS, it will be enriched immeasurably. And here's the other secret. If you said to your teenagers or the teenagers in your faith community, hey, do you want to do Bible study for a week in July? They'd be like, no. But if you say to them, will you help with VBS and really give them some autonomy and some input, when you're teaching them the themes, you're teaching them. Little kids are going to have a good time no matter what you do. But if you can engage the teenagers in making some of these decisions, that's really your target audience, and they will be spiritually enriched. Like I was like, my work here is done. The one day during our Wade in the Water VBS, we had a rainy day, which in Pittsburgh, like we should accommodate for this, but we had particularly rainy days that week. And it got very, very, very quiet in our church. And I thought, oh, this is a problem. What is going on here? So I went searching for my groups that were supposed to be at the various stations, some of whom could not be outside because it was raining. So I go up in the sanctuary, and one of our teenagers, who is an acolyte, had the thingy that you use to light the candles, and he was using it like a pointer. And he said, I got this, Mrs. Brown. I'm showing the kids the water stories that are in the stained glass windows. I was like, my work here is done. You rock. And I get like choked up thinking about it. So again, empower your teenagers, engage them. It will be amazing. All right, slide me. Okay, volunteer training. Everyone who volunteers needs to be trained. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about this. As I said, we allow some very young children to start as helpers. My rule of thumb is if they are in middle school and older, teenagers or adults, they need to be trained. You need to make sure that everybody's on the program. And here's the thing, teenagers are much more receptive to training than adults. I have adults who'll say, oh, I've got 6 kids, I can handle this. Or, you know, I'm a teacher, I can handle this. You cannot take that risk. Everyone needs training. Some of the key points that you want to cover in your training, number 1, 2 deep leadership. No one is ever to be alone with a child, period. Now, that may look like an adult and a child with a buddy, which leads into the next thing, the buddy system, or a teenager with 2 children as buddies, but you never, ever, ever are alone with a child. And one thing to think about, when we look at many of our adjudicatories and our denominations have suggested ratios of how many adults you need to be present for a group of kids. There's required, but there's also how many adults you need, but also the proximity that they need to be. So in other words, if I am an adult and I've got a group of 5th graders and I'm doing an activity in our parish hall and there's another adult in my library, which is right there, and there's a big glass door and they can see me and I can see them, do we kind of count as adults together? yes, they can see me, I can see them. If something happens, I yell, they're right there. So with older kids, having adults in proximity can be sufficient for certain things, or it might enable you to count your administrative staff in your parish and say, okay, if there's an emergency, could my parish administrator, step right on in? Absolutely. Could my clergy, could my janitorial staff? Assuming all these people are trained and vetted, and also that they're going to be present. If you're counting your clergy to be part of your staff for a security standpoint, but then you find out that they went out to lunch, well, they're not really helping you there. But you want to think about proximity. With little kids, you absolutely need those adults in very close proximity. As kids get older, they're capable of a little bit more independence. What also ties into that is how open your facility is. If you are in a facility that is open to the public and you have other groups and other activities that are going on, and other adults that you don't know who they are moving through the building, then you need to be much more closely attentive to where all of your children are at any given time. If you have a more closed environment, can a group of fifth graders that is led by 2 teenagers move from this classroom to the sanctuary? Yeah, that's fine. And so you really need to look at your context, look at your physical environment, and get a sense of the proximity of where the adults need to be. Youth protection considerations. This comes into things like when children need to use the restroom, or if you're in a situation where children need to change their clothes. You need to be very intentional in training your volunteers how to handle that. We utilize something we refer to as the bathroom lean, because if you send a group of little boys into the bathroom by themselves, somebody's going to pee on the wall. So you need some supervision, but on the other hand, you don't want an adult alone in a bathroom with a group of little boys or girls or whatever. So you have your people standing in the door frame of the bathroom. They can see inside to see the multi-stall bathroom, but they are still visible to anybody. They're not fully in the bathroom. And again, we've all had situations, if we've worked with young children, even if they're supposed to be potty trained, where some little kid walks out of the bathroom with their hands around their ankles and is like, somebody wet my bum. Obviously, you need to deal with this. And making it clear to your teens, certain things, helping children with toileting, any sort of changing clothes, is only to be handled by an adult. And with the adults, making sure that they understand that it needs to be in a way where another adult is able to witness what they are doing, and you just need to be very, very careful with that. No horseplay. And this is something that with teens that we have to talk about a lot. With little siblings, with cousins and smaller groups, piggyback rides, and all sorts of physical events, sitting on laps. Maybe that's okay. In this situation, you really have to help your teenagers define some physical boundaries. And I tell them, this might be okay with your cousins, but we can't do that here. You cannot be an effective leader if you've got little kids climbing all over you. And for reasons I will never understand, little kids want to climb all over big kids. And that also extends to, they're sitting in a circle and this little kid always wants to sit in the teenager's lap. And so we do things like saying, okay, there's the special spot next to me, and making sure that we take turns, that no child is granted favorite status and they can take turns being in that special spot next to the teenager. You need to know your state reporting guidelines as far as being a mandated reporter in the instance that anything bad happens. And you also need to tell your volunteers they have an obligation to report any concerns or issues to you. You in turn have an obligation and will act as you are required to do, but that doesn't mean that you're going to come back and update them. And the confidentiality is a big part of this. And it's not confidentiality so that we keep things hush-hush quiet, but that we protect people that might be involved in any difficult situation. You also want to train your volunteers in positive engagement. And this is stating what you want a child to do. Keep your feet on the sidewalk instead of don't go in the parking lot. And sometimes you got to go through some strange linguistic gymnastics to get there, but the more you practice it, the more automatic it becomes. So that's keep your hands to yourself instead of don't hit your buddy. It works with teenagers too, I found. We kind of laugh about that. And so really helping them with that, or even things like if you're on a playground or in a classroom, yelling at a kid from across the room is not going to get their attention when you need to get a child going to them and addressing them individually. So sometimes those little tips are really helpful. making sure in your volunteer training that everybody knows who your first aid person is. And you should have a first aid person. You need to know who your first aid person is if it isn't you. You need to check your church's first aid kit, because you don't want to discover that you don't have any Band-Aids when you need a Band-Aid, or God forbid something worse. And the first aider, people need to know where that person's going to be at all times. In our instances, one of my partners is a nurse, and she typically runs the library. So everybody knows that if there's an accident, an incident, whatever, run to the library to get Mrs. Morgan. Be a role model. This means really thinking about the language that we use and the conversations that we have in front of the kids who are around us, being careful both in content and tone. I tell my teenagers, we might be doing something that you think is really dumb. But if you're conveying that you're bored and this is stupid, your little kids are going to pick up on that. So I need my teenagers and my adults to be enthusiastic. I also remind them not to talk about campers, whether they're saying something positive or negative, because children are very attuned to that. And not talk about each other. So again, really modeling positive relationships. And we do these reminders daily. You cannot have this training once. Every day in your meeting, you need to be hitting the reminders, whether it's reminding people who has allergies, whether it's reminding people, hey, it's really, really hot out today, we need to make sure everybody's drinking water. Every day you need to be reminding people of this. We talk about social media rules. I secure permission to take pictures and to share pictures on our church's social media account. That does not give my teenagers permission to do so. They do, or my adults for that matter. And people are, they're enthusiastic. They're loving what they're doing. They want to take pictures. The kids are so cute. You have to explicitly let them know they do not have the permission to do that. Now, if my teenagers are on social media with each other, fine, they can take those pictures, but we need to be really clear about what permissions we have with our kids. Another important point is the rules are for everyone. Sometimes you'll have an adult that maybe they're going to volunteer and they're bringing their own kids. Well, those kids, can't be having a snack when nobody else is. They can't be playing on their parents' iPhone when nobody else is. Or I say to my teenagers, I don't want to see you walking around with a soda or eating candy or a bag of chips. Either we're all having a snack or nobody's having a snack. Or I say to my adults, hide the coffee. If you need to step around the corner and take a quick hit on the coffee, fine. But you shouldn't be doing anything that our campers aren't. And then finally, and this is super important, I convey to my volunteers they need to let me know if anything off script happens. And they might say, well, Mrs. Brown, I handled it. That's not the point. The point is not that you handled it. The point is when that child goes home and relays it to the parents, and the parents have questions, who are they going to call? Me. So if I don't know that something has happened, if I don't know how the situation was handled, I can't be an advocate for anybody. I'm kind of flying blind. So it's really important that your teenagers and your adults know that if anything off script happens, you need to know that that's not questioning their ability to handle it, but rather helping you to help them. So one of the things I want to think about, now that we've laid out all these rules and all logistics, as soon as you do that, you will have people ask for exceptions to the rules. And there we really get into pastoral versus practical considerations. For example, you might have somebody that says, well, my 3-year-old's really shy, so I want my 7-year-old and my 3-year-old to be assigned to the same group. Somebody might say, my mother-in-law is having foot surgery on Thursday. I can't volunteer on Thursday, but I can every other day. When you're making a decision about whether to make an exception to the rules, you need to think about a number of things. Number one, is this person asking because it's more convenient for them, or is there a real need? If there's a real need, then obviously I think you want to skew towards, okay, we're going to accommodate this. Quite frankly, you want to think about, does it help you? If I have someone who is a great volunteer, who has a 2-year-old who's a little bit too young that I normally wouldn't allow to attend VBS, but I know that adult's going to be a fantastic helper, might I let them bring that 2-year-old? Yeah, I might. And again, I need to think about that. You need to think about, if you make this exception, is it going to compromise the experience for everybody else? And is it going to compromise any safety? You cannot compromise on safety. In the instance of the 3-year-old and the 7-year-old rule, if you put the 7-year-old with the 3-year-old group, is that kid going to be bored and disruptive and therefore compromise the experience? Or if you put the 3-year-old with the 7-year-olds, or is that child going to be able to do all the activities that are assigned for them to do? And is there going to be a compromise in terms of the safety for that 3-year-old? So again, sometimes you have to say no. You also have to look at, is this going to provoke any sort of ill will amongst other people? You have to look at, is it likely to provoke similar requests? And if I say, yes, this person can do it, am I now going to have to do this for everybody? And again, this is knowing your community and your context. You can say, well, I'm going to be a stickler for registration deadlines. If your kid is not registered, they're not coming. Maybe in your community that works, or you may be in a community where there's a lot more uncertainty and fragility that people really aren't able to commit to registering in advance. And so you're like, all right, we're going to have walk-up registration and I'm ordering extra t-shirts. There's ways you can help to try to get people to do the things you want them to do. For example, we offer an early bird discount. And so that really helps to get people to register in advance. But ultimately, you have to make that decision. You also need to be very intentional about you have to keep as close track of the people who are registered to attend as your volunteers. On any given day, you really need to know who all you are responsible for. So having volunteers sign in and sign out is absolutely essential. If they're on site, you need to know who is there and you need to know where they are. So when you're walking around, you are carrying the schedule for the day, and you have to have that volunteer sign in and out with you, and you need to know where everybody is and who you are responsible for the day. So really, I will be honest with you, that's about what I had. I don't know if we are in a situation where are people able to type or ask any questions? Do we do that?
I'll be able to
Unmute them, they can share.
All right. So if anybody has any thoughts, inputs, questions, I would love to hear from you. On any of these topics, really, we can have an hour-long session on, arts and crafts by itself. So I'd love to know some of the things and concerns that you are dealing with, and in ways that I might help you work through some of those and some of the questions that you have. Anybody? Oh, Gregory D is raising his hand.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hello.
Hi. First of all, I want to thank you for this lovely webinar. I learned a lot, and I'm glad you were able to devote some time for us.
Thank you.
My question is about attracting volunteers. In your personal experience, do you have any tips or any surefire ways to attract people, to get people really excited for helping out at VBS?
Wow, that's like $1 million question always. One of the things I think is important is be very specific about what you need. Just being like, hey, we're doing VBS, we need volunteers. That doesn't necessarily get it done. Whereas if you say, if you go to the choir room during rehearsal and say like, hey, would any of you like to come lead a song? People are hesitant about kind of open-ended obligations. Whereas if you're very specific, someone who might be nervous about, oh, I don't know what this is going to be, if you're very specific, they're more likely to say, oh, I can do that. And once you start sucking them in and you run a good program and it's fun, then they want to. You go to your youth group and you say, guys, I really need you to help me out with VBS, and here's my theme, and here's what we're doing. Does anybody have any good ideas? This year, our theme was building the city of God. So for the day that we were talking about stones and rocks, I said to my teenagers, I was like, I don't know what to do for a snack. I looked at them and they're like, duh, Pop Rocks. So give people, and that's another point, give people some autonomy and engagement and opportunity to contribute. Even in your print solicitations for volunteers, if you're putting an announcement in your bulletin, you might want to say, do your teenagers need service hours? Have them call so-and-so, have them be in touch with me. Be very specific about what you want, and I think that really helps. And again, I would reach out if there are scouts in your community. I'm also a Girl Scout leader, and nobody does theme programming like the Scouts. And so involving them in the planning process might help them earn badges. So grandparents, going
Shoulder tapping people too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the personal ask is always, and then that way, if people would say, well, I would, but I have this thing that I have to leave by noon, and you can be like, oh, that's okay. If you could just come in the morning. Or like I said, And you might even do it like kind of angel tree standpoint, from like an angel tree perspective. We need this or we need that. We need someone to help build a set, put that up there. We need someone to bake a dozen cookies, put that up there. So again, really defining the tasks, I think really helps. Does that kind of, I don't know, give you something to go on?
That really helps. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Cool. All right, anybody else? What's everybody thinking about doing this year? Any great themes out there? Is it just too early in the year? I heard a great thing last year. Somebody called me and they said that their community does this big parade on 4th of July where they celebrate all of like their first responders and the people that serve their community. And they were like, so we want to do like a servant leadership and that, you know, kind of build that somehow. And so their VBS project that they worked on all week was they made a gigantic float that would be part of this parade, which I thought was awesome. I mean, there were so many good scriptural tie-ins to, you know, being a servant and what that means. And they had people from the community come into their VBS and talk about kind of the, you know, how their faith informs who they are as a police officer or as an EMT or whatever. And I just thought that was so neat because it was so integrated in the community's culture and what was important in that community. Anytime you can connect to community, for example, in my community, we do a big Earth Day. So when we did the St. Francis in the Garden and we were talking about kind of like growing things and gardening, it made sense for us to have a booth at Earth Day and say, this is what we're doing. We invited somebody who is a beekeeper in our community to come in and talk about the environmental threats to bees and that kind of thing. So the more you can engage with your community, both your church community and your local community, I think that really can enhance your program. Any other questions? All right, well, this has been really great, and I have to admit, it's getting me excited to think about VBS. One of the things that I want to invite all of you is we're really trying to build some community and conversation around VBS through my website. So I would encourage you to like my Facebook page, check out my website, because we're going to try to facilitate some more of these conversations and really share ideas, because that's where it gets really fun. When you get a bunch of passionate people going, we did this. This would be so exciting, or here's a great idea for you. So thank you so much for being a part of this today, and continue to look to PTS for more continuing education support. Peace and love.